Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly Shelf, and welcome to our penultimate day of Victorian poetry. So today I talked about having a choice between two poets. So there was a chance to read a section of Circe by Julia Augusta Webster, or we could skip straight to Thomas Hardy. And I found that I didn't really have the time or the inclination to read the whole of that longer poem. So we've got Thomas Hardy today, which I'm very happy about because I love Thomas Hardy dearly. He's one of my favourite Victorian writers. Tess of the D'Urbervilles would probably normally make it into my top 10 books, just because it is so phenomenally magnificent, and I haven't ever really read that much poetry by Thomas Hardy. So this year for Victober, I know that Ros from Scally Dandling About the Books has read some Thomas Hardy poems, and she has created a very lovely video discussing them, so I would highly recommend that you go and watch that. The poem that I'm going to be discussing is going to be a different one from the ones that she talked about. And it's the first one in the anthology here from Thomas Hardy. It's called Hap. So much as I love Hardy's longer fiction, I've never really read a lot of his poetry, but poetry is something that he wrote throughout his career, apparently. This specific poem was written in 1866, which is actually before he started working on any significant fictional projects. His first his first full-length novel was called The Poor Man and the Lady, a story with no plot, containing some original verses, and that he wrote in 1868, wasn't actually published. I'm quite curious to see what that one's actually about. But then later in life, when he became more disillusioned with novel writing and the reception to some of his novels, particularly ones that are dealing with more challenging themes relating to Victorian morality and particularly rules around marriage, I suppose, like Tess, and apparently Jude the Obscure, which I'm reading at the moment, so I don't want any spoilers on Jude. As he became more disillusioned with the reception to those books, he moved back into writing a lot more poetry, and that was kind of where he was at the end of his career, just more producing books of poetry. So I was quite interested to learn in the little biography section about Thomas Hardy that he was originally intending to be ordained and become a minister in the Church of England, but he lost his faith and attributes that loss of faith to reading The Origin of Species. So it's quite interesting to see that, I guess, the personal impact of, because we hear a lot about how The Origin of Species and Darwin's work was a huge fundamental challenge to the Victorian era and established religious beliefs and so on. But I'd never heard of any specific individuals saying that, specifically saying, well, if I'm going to believe in evolution, then that completely changes my worldview. So it's fascinating to know that that was how Hardy reacted to that, and that he did have that ability to review that evidence and then change his beliefs and intentions for his life. So that pushed him into spending more of his life on writing, but also on architecture, which was his main, the thing that he was trained in and his main career, I suppose. It's quite interesting that happened in Hardy's life when we look at some of the characters that he produced, like Angel Clare, also goes through this feeling of not being able to go and work in the church because he no longer feels like he has a strong enough belief in the fundamental principles of the church, although Angel Clare is still a religious character. But then you also have to question whether Hardy felt like he had to make certain characters of his religious, because the wider Victorian world was still very much dominated by Christianity. So anyway, on the subject of, I suppose, religious belief and understandings of fate and the meaning of life, I suppose, we have the poem Hap. And hap, if you're not familiar with the word, kind of means chance or occurrence, I suppose. Okay. If but some vengeful god would call to me from up the sky and laugh, "Thou suffering thing, know that thy sorrow is my ecstasy, that thy love's loss is my hate's profiting," then would I bear it, clench myself, and die, steeled by the sense of ire unmerited, half eased in that a powerfuller than I had willed and meted me the tears I shed. But not so. How arrives it joy lies slain, and why unblooms the best hope ever sown? Crass casualty obstructs the sun and rain, and dicing time for gladness casts a moan. These purblind doomsters had as readily strown blisses about my pilgrimage as pain. So yeah, it's a very interesting reaction to the idea of suffering in the world and the cause behind suffering. I think these days a commonly cited reason for questioning belief, I suppose, is the presence of suffering in the world. And there's kind of like, if there's like an all-knowing and wonderful, all-powerful God, why does he allow people to suffer? Why does he allow people, like children, to die, and so on and so forth? But it seems like Hardy is almost saying he'd rather that the suffering was caused by a God, because then it would be easier for him to comprehend and accept and understand, whereas the fact that his suffering is not caused by a God, and that it's all down to chance and misadventure, is the thing that's causing him the greater distress. I find it interesting that he's chosen to construct this poem as a sonnet. It does have 14 lines. It does have, broadly speaking, iambic pentameter. You can count out 5 beats in every line, although most of the lines adapt that in some way and don't stick to it particularly rigorously in terms of how you would speak them. Because it reminds me a lot of John Donne's religious poems, where he also had these kind of profoundly questioning poetic experiences, where he was very much Christian, but also very much questioning the relationship between man and God, or man and religion. And I feel like Hardy is potentially connecting back to that, or making some kind of reflection or connection to that theme. It's a form that's so often used romantically, and I guess the religious relationship is the other major relationship that you can discuss as a poet, I suppose. I don't know. It's interesting how accepting he sounds like he would be of this like vengeful God, kind of like Old Testament style, brutal and vicious religious character, and the idea that they would experience his sorrow as ecstasy and so on. It's almost like he relishes that idea of that as a possibility, and then even when he reflects that God to him doesn't exist, then he's still personifying the forces of chance that are actually having an impact on his life. So he's calling casualty and time purblind doomsters, which is just a really cool way of phrasing that description. I find it interesting how this has implications for his fictional work, because one of the things that I identify in Hardy's fiction writing is a really strong idea of fate and doom, kind of almost like a Greek tragedy kind of structure to it, where like if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And I'd always kind of assumed that had a slight, almost like a religious bent to it, or not necessarily Christian, but almost slightly pagan, like this fated idea. But it seems like he just really had a very pessimistic outlook on the role of chance in creating really awful situations for people. And maybe he just liked to put his characters, maybe he's the vengeful God. He's the vengeful God that loves to put his characters through intense suffering. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to read it again, and then I'd like you to let me know what you think of this poem, and how you react to Hardy's frustration and sense of despair that you get from this poem, about the fact that, you know, he's on his own in the world dealing with this suffering that has come completely by chance, rather than, I suppose, if it was a God that meted out these, meted him the tears he sheds, then there would be almost like a sense of purpose to that. So yeah, how do you react to Hardy's sense of purposelessness in the suffering that he's experiencing? I don't know what exactly he was suffering over, but maybe he was just internally a bit angsty. I can definitely believe that of Hardy. If but some vengeful God would call to me from up the sky and laugh, "Thou suffering thing, know that thy sorrow is my ecstasy, that thy love's loss is my hate's profiting. Then would I bear it, clench myself, and die, steeled by the sense of ire unmerited, half eased in that a powerfuller than I had willed and meted me the tears I shed. But not so. How arrives it joy lies slain, and why unblooms the best hope ever sown? Crass casualty obstructs the sun and rain, and dicing time for gladness casts a moan. These purblind doomsters had as readily strown blisses about my pilgrimage as pain. Yeah, I really want to know why unblooms the best hope ever sown. I really want to know what that best hope was. And like, thy love's loss. It really sounds like he was in love with someone and they died or something, or some awful thing happened relating to somebody he loved. But who knows? It will remain a mystery unless anybody's got any insights. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that one. Tomorrow is going to be the last day of Victorian poetry, and we have Gerald Manley Hopkins, who, his name sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't think I've ever read a poem by him before, so I am quite interested to get to that. Alright, speak to you soon. Thank you for watching.